Hi everyone, Aaron here. Good databases have to be understandable to two very different audiences. On the one hand, humans are the ones who enter in the data and later visualize it, whereas computers are the ones who have to store the data and be able to parse it as parts of large-scale analysis. Keeping both of these groups happy is not easy. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of the generic format and structure of all ENKI data files, which are designed to be understandable to both the carbon-based and silicon-based members of the audience. All of the ENKI data files are composed of Excel files that have multiple different tabs. Each tab stores a different type of information about the experiment. Within each of these tabs, there are three different types of data tables that appear. The first is unstructured data tables. A perfect example of this is the Notes tab. An unstructured database starts with a label at the top to remind you what it's about, so Notes, and then underneath there's no structure that is required. You can enter in values into any cell that you like, because these are only for humans to read. The second data table type is a simple header table. The reference tab is a perfect example of this. This is like the most generic data table you've seen before. It has a single header line that gives the title of each column. And then underneath that, there are the data that are stored in the cells. There's pretty much not much else to say about those. The third data type is actually the most common in ENKI data files, and this is a header with units. So for instance, if we go to the experimental conditions tab, you can see that rather than having only a single row with titles, we have two header rows. The first row has all the titles like before, but the second row contains information about the units of those values stored in that column. And those units can always be selected from a pull-down menu. Another thing to point out here is that many of the different columns, especially ones that have difficult to understand meanings, will provide tips about how to fill that column out as tooltips. So if you move your mouse over the column title, then the tooltip will appear showing you all of the valid entries for that particular column. Another thing to point out is the fact that many of these data cells have specific control language that must be used. So for instance, under device, we need to select from a specific set of valid keywords that can be entered as device names. In that case, we provide a pull-down menu in the Excel file from which you can select the value. Many of these always include a sort of null value, which is no info, no underscore info. And no info refers to the fact that they just didn't give you enough information in order to fill that out. If needed, you can always type a custom value in the cell, even when there's a pull-down menu. However, we urge you, please select from the list if the option you need is available. A final type of data that exists are cases where we have control language you need to use. However, the list of possibilities is very, very long. A perfect example is the lab ID. If you hover over the lab ID column, it says that this is the specific ID of the location where the experiment was performed, and you should look it up on the lab ID sheet. The lab ID sheet can be found at the wiki on GitLab. Click on the link appearing on the screen. There you can look up the specific lab ID or number associated with the laboratory where the experiments were performed. For instance, if you bring up the lab ID page, you will obtain the following list of laboratories, and you can see that there are hundreds of them. And so you can scroll through this list to locate your particular laboratory, or you can simply search for things. For instance, if you want to find Caltech, you can see, here's Caltech. So when we have Caltech, we should enter the number 2 under lab ID. The final tip that I want to give you is what you need to do in order to add in multiple values into a single cell. This occurs often when the experimenters tell you that they might use, for instance, multiple different container types, but they don't tell you when they use one or the other. In this particular data set, that occurred for containers where the experimenters used silver and platinum containers, but they didn't say when they used which. In this case, you should provide the list of options as a semicolon separated list and make sure to include a space after every semicolon. This also occurs in phase reaction experiments where multiple reactions occurred during the course of the experiment. And so you need to provide the equation for each reaction separated by semicolons and spaces. That's all for now. Thank you very much.